Greetings, seekers of ancient wisdom. So, in today's episode, we're actually talking about the physiology of fear. And I'm joined today with our experienced shaman, Brigitte. Brigitte, welcome to another exciting show.
Thank you so much, Deepak. How are you doing?
I am very, very well today and very excited to cover this very deep and necessary topic, the physiology of fear. So, Brigitte, tell us,
Beautiful.
what is the physiology of fear?
So I think it's, first of all, straight off the bat, I just want to say, I am not a doctor. My experience is really within the field of shamanism. And through that experience, through moving through that archetype of medicine woman and shaman, and the precursor to that interest being interest in multidimensionality, all the things unseen, etc., I inevitably stepped into a space where I began to self-study through my clients and through the experiences what trauma was, how it was affecting the body, how it obviously affects our mental body, our emotional body, etc. So I'm going to do my best here with the subject matter. But essentially the physiology of fear would be, how is fear being recorded in our body? How is it influencing us? And how does it speak to the nervous system? And basically how is it affecting us? How is fear affecting us? And particularly within our now moment and not only now moment, but particularly now, how fear is being used against us as a weapon to keep us in a certain nervous system space, which affects our mental body and which keeps us in a certain state of consciousness. So if we look at fear from the perspective of personalized consciousness and identity, how does it affect us and how it's being used? So we've heard of this descriptor of fear porn, how fear porn is being used to keep us in certain states in nervous system dysregulation, to manipulate us. So there's many aspects around fear that are quite interesting and important for you as an individual to begin to understand. And then we also have the brain, the three brains. So most people know that our subconscious brain, it's that picture of the iceberg. The subconscious brain has this massive iceberg below water that we don't even know about. We're not consciously aware of, and how, our fear records as such sit in this aspect of the brain. And it's basically there to protect us, but we're not creating the links with regards to why we're acting in a certain way, why our body is responding in a certain way, because it's sitting in subconscious memory. And so here we look at trauma, and the brain is kind of sending a signal out into the body, and we're, maybe something hasn't quite happened that's fearful for us at that time. Yet we're in a space of freeze or fight and flight, and we don't really understand why. So we also kind of speak to the brain here. And this is how we begin to look at fear and understand fear. I am so sorry to interrupt. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching and listening to our Delicately Wild podcast. This is just a short interruption to say, please, from the bottom of my heart, if you could like, share, or do whatever it is that is required on this particular social media platform, I would greatly appreciate it, as this content does kind of get squashed within the algorithms. And the other part of this is to just remind you that I have a beautiful coaching container coming up called the Azurite Temple. If you are interested in expansion, consciousness, existentiality, the nature of this reality, and really digging deep into healing work, uncovering and mostly embodiment work within a supported community and a high vibrational container, then you might want to touch base with me, and you are free to ask any questions. Thank you so much for your time. Please do enjoy the rest of the podcast. Ciao.
So let's start at the beginning, which is what happens in the body. So you mentioned the central nervous system, the brain. I'm sure there's other parts of the body that get affected. So what actually happens in the body with fear? And sorry, and before you continue, so it's important for people to understand there's actually multiple bodies. You know, there's your physical body, your mental body, and your emotional body that are all affected by fear. And these bodies are,
correct,
all part of your being. So it'll be good to really understand. But let's start with the physical body, like what actually happens with these organs and the nervous system.
Well, essentially, the nervous system goes into, let's say we have like a robot, for South Africans, we call it a robot. But anyone who's international that is listening, we have a traffic light, right? And we have our green, yellow, and red. And so in our green zone, we're in a really sweet space within the nervous system. We're feeling relaxed. Our heart rate is at a beautiful pace. The nervous system is in parasympathetic nervous system, meaning everything is smoothly functioning. We are feeling rested and relaxed. We can be social in this space. We can, experience joy, love, humor, fun, and really be okay. We're in a green zone. And then the nervous system kind of experiences an influx of energy or information or data, because it's all the same thing in accordance to the law of one, right? So whether we call it energy, information, or data. So the brain is receiving that, and we begin to move into the yellow zone. And in the yellow zone, we're kind of experiencing an anxiety, a low-level anxiety, just a little bit of irritability. So, the anxiety part might be the flight, and the irritability might be the fight, So we get triggered quicker. We are, we're irritable. So the nervous system is on edge. So we can imagine it like a sensor. So something is annoying us. Something is, there's a feedback mechanism that's happening. And so the body moves into deeper levels of stress, right? And through that stress, the mental body is coping by, being snappy, being irritable, not kind of wanting to move away from, noise, chaos, etc., etc. So that's our low level. And we may have like a mid-level and high level that reaches into, if we're pushing the nervous system, or if our stresses, let's say, from the outside influence, if our stresses are really coming down on us, we're going to move into panic, right? So that would be the flight part would be panic, and the fight part would be rage, all right? And then we have these outbursts, and you may have a fight with someone, or you just can't keep it in anymore. So the body, much like we were speaking about in our episode about trigger events, this trigger event is creating a sequence of cause and effect, and the consequence of that cause and effect is that our bodies, emotionally, physically, emotionally, and mentally, are now responding and reacting to that event. And again, you may be experiencing sleeplessness, insomnia, mental, kind of like a hamster wheel where your mental body is just overdriving, like what is going on, what is going on, what is going on. And so there's this heightened irritability. You may also move into spaces of detaching from those around you. detaching from social experiences and just kind of trying to maintain some sort of what's the word I want to use? Some sort of, I guess, cage for yourself, because you're feeling within yourself that something is, it's like a ticking time bomb. So then you would kind of retract and move into a bit more isolation. And that's fine to do, but if you don't understand what is happening and reading the physiological symptoms along with the mental symptoms and the emotional fatigue that you're going through, how long can you keep yourself isolated before that panic really increases and before you move into rage? And this particular space within this yellow zone, so we've moved up, levels in the yellow zone to say, we can have mild anxiety and irritability moving to panic and rage. If we don't look at that and along with what's happening in our collective, you may feel very disempowered a lot of the time. And then we have our freeze zone, where I'm sure most people know this, but if you've got an animal that is moving through a freeze zone, what do? They play dead, right? So it's really just this complete breakdown. So many people could say, does a nervous breakdown fall under this category? Indeed it does. The nervous system is absolutely shot. We have moved through all of our beautiful hormones in the body, and we're just in absolute depletion. And so we have nothing to do at that stage other than move into hyporegulation, which is a space where we would be kind of bedridden, for a very simple way of saying it, just dead. There's no coping mechanism, or your coping mechanism, let's say your coping mechanism is to now be down and allow your nervous system to rest with deep, deep healing. And sometimes when we get to freeze, it may be a little too late, so like I say, people may have a nervous breakdown at that point, and they may move into hospitalization or something like that because they literally cannot cope anymore. It's not always that excessive. So for someone like me who is in tune with what's happening with her body, her mental body, her emotional body, I can also be in a freeze mode and be in awareness of the fact that I'm in freeze. But it doesn't necessarily mean that my nervous system is completely shot, that I need to be hospitalized, etc. But with the wisdom that I have, the awareness that I have, and the experience that I have, I can be aware enough to know that, oh my God, I'm in complete hyperregulation and I am in freeze mode at the moment. And there's nothing for me to do other than rest. So I hope that gives a little bit of insight into what's happening physiologically with the body.
Yeah, and I wanted to delve a bit deeper, especially when you mentioned all these different levels of what fear can do in your body. So obviously there's the green zone where everything is great, but then you've got the yellow zone, and there's a range of different feelings, anxieties, etc., that happen there, and they get more intense until you can get into a red zone where it's panic, and you might have that flight or freeze situation. So
and we can imagine. Carry on. Sorry.
So I've remember reading, or I think it was somebody that was on my show previously. They spoke about the part of your brain. I think it's the medulla oblongata or something, right at the bottom or the top of your spine. And when you in that freeze, when you have that event that either triggers a flight or freeze response, it's like the rest of your brain shuts down, and it's only that part that's right at the top of your spine that that's activated.
Correct.
And you, yeah. So that's really interesting to unpack. I always wanted to understand that a bit better.
Correct. And they kind of say that part of the brain sitting there, so it's really the inner brain, right? To some degree, we could call it the reptilian brain. Like it's holding information. And like I said, it's the subconscious part. So the conscious parts switch off, and this aspect of the brain now needs to kind of ping data to us that is saying, hey, alert, alert, alert. And what they say is this part of the brain is receiving like something like 40,000 bits of information in any moment. But we're only really able to access consciously about 30 to 40 bits of that information. So, you know, and this is where human beings struggle, is we want to understand something. The mental body wants to understand something. We're so mind driven, and the mind is a very, very powerful thing. And it has such a huge, it plays such a huge role in your conscious evolution. Yet if you are reading through philosophies or spiritual doctrines, it would say you are not the mind. Yet the mind is a very powerful place. And so our mental body wants that data, but if it's only receiving 30 to 40 bits of that data when that aspect of the brain is holding 40,000 in any one moment, you can imagine that the mind is struggling to understand what's happening. And so in these moments of fight and flight and stress, stress release, we've really got to look at the body and somehow just shut the mind down. I'm not saying ignore it, but you might not have the answers at that point in time. And to be extremely honest, you're more than likely not going to have the answers unless you begin to look at the body and use the body for a source of information. In spirituality at the moment, you may be hearing a lot of information about embodiment, right? So we move through different states of our spiritual experiences and our spiritual awakening, of which, depending on when you awakened, but let's say pre-2020 timeline, and through this series, I'll often use COVID as a timeline trigger event and an opportunity for me to share information because it was and is so powerful. So let's say you went through an awakening pre-2020 timeline. Generally at this point, what pushes you to the awakening, other than trigger events, which we discussed, is it could be a fascination, much like myself, in things that are otherworldly, things that are mystical, the nature of our reality, existentiality. And so your awakening process might be a little easier and might be fantastical, et cetera, et cetera. But now we don't really have that luxury where our awakening is really pushing us into spaces where it's really affecting the nervous system, which is really affecting the mental body because we don't have the understanding, right? Because it's only giving us that 30 to 40 bits of data. And so I was speaking about embodiment, and, the difference between the timelines is at a certain point in time, we could continue our spiritual evolution, our exploration of our consciousness from the perspective of like, wow, I really want to experience these higher dimensional things. And I'm doing transcendental meditation, and I'm taking psychedelics, and I'm exploring the nature of the cosmos. But in the now moment, because we have such a big amount of stresses on us, because we are in an age where information and technology is just advanced so quickly and so much, we have so much data coming in. So that's also an issue to speak about, is we have so much data coming in that little 30 to 50 bits of data that is really important for us is kind of in the washing machine of all the other data that we're dealing with. So the only thing that we have to look at is our body. What is the body feeling like? You know, when you're sitting with someone and you're feeling anxious, so there's this ball in the pit of your stomach, you might have some sort of response mechanism where, you know, your leg is always shaking, or your body is you know, you've got this little tick or something, or your heart rate is increasing. You may begin sweating, something like that. You've got to notice that and go, shit, I don't have the answer for why this is occurring. The only thing I know is that I can label it as unease. I can label it as anxiety, and my body is responding. And from that perspective, we now need to look at a healing protocol, because the information, that 30 and 40 bits of information, is basically trying to tell you that there's a memory stored in that section of the brain. And that memory is surrounding a trauma. All right. And it's, you know, because time, in spiritual terms, time does not exist. So that aspect of the brain is re-experiencing a trauma. All right. Something within your environment, your external environment, is pinging at your brain, in your system, your subconscious memory, that you are in danger at this point in time. But in your conscious mind, that may not relate, right? Because your conscious mind is basically linked to linear time. And in your current linear time frame, you might say, I don't understand why I'm responding in this way, why I'm feeling so anxious, because I'm still going to work. Nothing has really changed, right? But within that part of the brain, there's a memory system, a software program within the hardware that is going alert, alert, alert. It's recollecting something that is similar in frequency, that is warning you that something is going on. And the beautiful part of that is, again, if we do listen to our bodies and kind of allow the mind to step aside and be like, I don't need to know why, I just need to understand that my body is responding in this way, and I'm now going to do something about it. And we'll get into the trauma aspect a little deeper. I'm sure we're going to go there, because it's very interesting, because you know, those trauma aspects may not even be linked to this particular timeline.
Yeah, so let's go into that trauma aspect. So, I mean, trauma is obviously a much more deeper type of fear, right? So it's still a fear response, but a traumatic event is probably much more deeper, and that really are the main events in our lives when you look back, is like the traumatic ones, especially for creating energy and emotional blockages. So I would assume it works in exactly the same way, but what are the differences that you wanted to highlight?
Well, I'm just going to flow here because there's so much. What's very interesting is we have a perception, so therefore the mind has a perception on what trauma is and how it looks like, but we have to understand that trauma is relative. And also, it is so delicately weaved into our realities that we may not even know that something was trauma or something was traumatic. And I think I'm going to share with a personal example now of what I've currently gone through, because it's kind of blown my mind. And this is a great example, and we'll move around it. So recently, so a couple of years ago, I ended things with a partner of mine who, through the healing process, I realized was an extremely narcissistic man, which is not an uncommon occurrence within the lives of healers, because many healers are empaths, and it is a natural it's like textbook for an empath and a narcissist to come together, right? And I'm going to share why just now. So that was a relationship coming to a closing. I've been single for a couple of years now. Obviously, the human aspect of me is in deep, and every human will go through this, is in deep desire to connect with another. So recently, someone has come into my field. I knew that it wasn't going to be the one for me. It is a very difficult match to get because my frequency is so high, because of my path. I kind of am on the path of the sage or the priest or the hermit, but it doesn't mean I don't have those human urges, wants, needs, and desires. So someone came into my path who I knew wasn't the one, but I wished to engage very consciously to fulfill X, Y, Z, right? That was done. And afterwards, even though I didn't have a big attachment because I'm psychic and I understand how these things work and I know to be non-attached. But what ended up happening was I became very hurt and heartbroken at the actions of this individual, because even though I know he would have pulled away based on stereotypical coping mechanisms of men, it was such a strong pull away in such a quick moment, and I learned so much from it. The point of me sharing this is through the observation of his pulling away, I was in absolute recognition of what we would call his coping mechanisms. So his coping mechanisms, because there's no way that I always encourage working from the heart, right? So the coping mechanisms that he instituted to protect himself from deeper heart opening, he instituted hard, fast, and strong, right? With a lot of addictive personalities, addictive hobbies, addictive processes, and really just numbing the mind. So it's complete dissociation. Okay, so in essence, this is a hyperregulation. Okay, so now we begin to see how the nervous system is working. So he moves into hyperregulation. I then move into hypo because I'm kind of heartbroken and I'm just sitting as dead to save and protect myself. So, and then communication shuts down, etc., etc. What transpired was I realized that this person was deeply narcissistic, which freaked me out because I wasn't aware of it in the beginning. And so I came up with this statement of even reliable people can be unreliable, because he seemed like someone reliable and he was in a framework that suited him. But outside of that framework, he became very unreliable, which makes me feel unsafe, which then activates the nervous system, which then moves me through a mental process of gaslighting myself. Was the experience I had what I thought it was, etc., etc. And so we need to have a strong understanding of oneself and situations, which I do have. And so observing this narcissistic aspect was just a jaw dropper for me. And what I realized what was happening from a soul perspective was I'm just going through a rehash of this exam. I've passed the exam with my ex-husband, and now this is being rehashed to me. So instead of it taking 5.5 years, it's a 3-month experience that I needed to see and learn quickly. What occurred during this time was I kept thinking about my ex-husband's name. And I mean, their names are completely different. And it was so in my space. And this is that part of the brain. Those are those bits of data that were coming to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so intense. Like, why is my ex coming into this? And I know the reason, because I do the work that I do. I'm being given information that is showing me this is a warning sign. Please step away. Please step away from the vehicle, And so this is a beautiful example of how that information can come through when we're in enough awareness. And most people will push it aside, right? And I didn't, because it's hard to say no. You know, one of the strongest things we can do in our reality is say no. And so I think I got a bit lost there, but I did speak to the aspect of that information driving through. We were speaking about trauma. Yes, I'd like to complete this. So what I realized was, so in recognition of this whole depletion of my nervous system, moving into freeze mode, observing him moving into hyperregulation through coping mechanisms, through addictive behaviors, etc., I then go, wow, you've once again brought this into your space. Why? Because within the one, I would be as narcissistic as this person. There's something within me that is a vibrational match. And that is not nice work to do, right? But when you're picking it up quickly, there is, you know, a wonderful sense of empowered state of being. And it may be that there was just a tiny little bit of resonance left in your frequency that matched that. What began to unfold was a recognition that the reason I keep attracting these men is, one, because of trauma, right? And I started looking at my mother. And the reason my mother came into this was she was also, she showed a similar coping mechanism as this individual. And I began to link it. So for example's sake, within narcissist's reality, no one else's reality is important. Nobody else's opinion is important. It's really just me. And my mother is very similar to a certain way, not to such a bad degree, but there was a similar tendency, and it made me link it. And basically going through my mother and myself, my relationship, my upbringing, what I came to the conclusion of was my tendencies to find these type of men is based on a trauma with my mother not being cared for enough in that space, not feeling safe, etc., and creating these relationships because I am hyper attuned to trying to fix what is wrong, because that's what I had to do with my mother. I'm leaving out certain parts and welcome to go through it again. But in this now moment, I'm diving deep into being the age of 5 and moving through competitive sports, not being at home. Now, my conscious mind has no memory of a terrible upbringing. You know, I did professional sports for many years. I was never at home. My coaches, I spent more time with my coaches than my mom. So my conscious mind would say, but there was no real drama. You know, I was safe. I had a mom, a dad, But the trauma sits in the subconscious, where my soul aspect clearly felt unsafe around my mother because I didn't have a relationship with her. She used to work in hospitality, so I did a lot of sports. I happened to be very good at that sport. She was in hospitality. As a young girl, I didn't have that motherly energy, right? And because she was in hospitality, her nervous system was an absolute wreck. I always felt that, not consciously or cognitively knowing any of this because I'm a child. So what do? I adapt. I become hyper attuned to every little move that she makes, every facial expression, every frown, everything. And so I become hyper attuned. Why do I do that? Because it keeps me safe, right? Within my dynamic. And so I've become good at that. So in a room, in a social space, what do? The neural pathway is set for me to be very good at picking up the riskiest thing in the room. And so this is why I keep attracting the wounded masculine. It's because of a trauma and a wound from my mother. And all of the shamanic work that I've done, I've only come to that conclusion now. And I don't say that with shame because I'm supposed to be some guru. I'm merely highlighting how deep the rabbit hole goes. And this is a trauma within this lifetime. You know, I am also, based on my state of consciousness, that which I am embodying in terms of frequency. I am also in the moment very, very deeply in a space of hyper-regulation where I am resting a lot because I'm experiencing a lot of war timelines, and in our physical reality at the moment, we are experiencing a lot of it. But there are galactic laws, wars and historical wars outside of this incarnation that I am re-experiencing through my body. So, there's a lot as an individual human angelic being that we are processing. And yesterday we spoke about trigger events where we cannot ignore these things because it's just escalating and escalating and escalating. So the trauma work and the trauma release work, or at least identification that your nervous system is in a bit of a spot right now, needs to be had. We cannot ignore these things. And they are not quick fixes either.
Yeah, I think we need to uncover some of the stuff you spoke about there a little bit more deeper, especially the fact about how you said you kept attracting the same narcissistic masculine energy. And I think this is relevant to so many people around the world. We keep attracting the wrong things into our life. It could be the wrong partner in a relationship. It could be the wrong opportunities,
business partner,
business, or anything. And you keep reliving like almost the same scenario. Obviously, the players, the characters are different, but energetically, it's the same.
Correct.
And you spoke about like the energy resonance that attracts this to you, and that's because of that energy resonance in your being, caused potentially by this traumatic event that happened in our youth, right? And this is relevant for, I would say, the entire planet, because traumatic event, like you said, doesn't have to be something extreme that you can pinpoint, but it can be more subtle, like
correct.
Like
and that's what makes it difficult.
Yes.
Because, for example's sake, if you have someone who has been sexually abused, they may have a high propensity and a high probability to attract those kind of partners, right? But in that situation, you could say, well, that makes sense because I was sexually abused, and, or a lot of people may not even have memory of that, but it makes sense. But when there's subtle traumas, and this is what I'm dealing with, of just like, oh my God, of course, as a little girl, you need the love of your mother. Do I think my mother is unloving, unkind? No. But the fact is, she was not there. We were not in each other's field as a young girl. We were not. And she has her own traumas. So here we begin to look at ancestral traumas. She has her own traumas around being loving, right? So physical touch, physical contact. I mean, my mother was someone who, if you hugged her, her whole body would go like this, her hands would be like this, and her hands would be at the side of her body. And, that's not comfortable to hug someone like that. So now we begin looking at the ancestral traumas. And what came to light for me yesterday while I was moving through this, because this is how fresh it is in my space, was and observing the masculines in my space, because I recently actually filmed a little podcast for myself about how I'm struggling with friendship here, and I keep finding these people that are just unavailable and wounded, and that's okay. But I usually, I find those people and I say, hey, this is the work that I do. I'm really able to help you. But there's a part of me that I don't only want my reality to be filled with clients. I would like some friends where I don't have to move into deep psychological conversations, other than that naturally coming up. And then we had this aspect about narcissism being presented to me of why we, or the empath and the narcissist, of why we are hyper attuned, it's because we felt unsafe. So a lot of this aspect around fear, the physiology of fear, is because we feel unsafe. And it may not click, it may not click because you may be in your beautiful house, you have your job, you've got your income, you've got your family, but somewhere there's a safety issue. And this is how we become manipulated. So essentially, with everything I've said, if we bring it down to, it's a fear. Our trauma is always linked to a fear, and that fear is usually linked to safety.
And it sounds like the fear creates some sort of imbalance in your nervous system, right? So your nervous system
Correct.
starts maybe firing a bit faster, or I guess there must be some sort of change in the electrical nature of it, and this imbalance is creating a change in the frequency of our body, and that really is maybe what you're speaking about, how that attracts into your field that which your field resonates with, right? So we're electromagnetic, and that's
Yes.
how it really works. So then you touched into what I think is really important, is that the second time that you went through this experience, you were much more aware, and the learning was a much shorter time. So instead of taking 5.5 years to learn the lesson on the previous time, now it was just 3 months, and you got the message.
Nipped it in the bud. Yes. Correct, because and that brings in shadow work, because there is an aspect of me that completely resists the fact that I'm narcissistic, or that I might have narcissistic tendencies. That's not something nice to say about yourself. And the interesting thing about narcissism is, like, it's always the other person, right? It's not you, it's the other person. But if we're all one within the one, then it is a mirror to something that is matching you. And, the empath and the narcissist, the empath is narcissistic to a certain degree because it always wants to heal the other, and this is, it's a topic for another session, but accountability, responsibility, and consent within contractual work with energy workers, etc., etc. But again, in friendship, it becomes very difficult because I know as a high level, aware, conscious being embodying Christ consciousness, I can see what's happening. But my physical desires, my lower chakras still want this thing. And so I bypass the alarm system. I put in the code and I go, no, it's okay. And then I go into that experience, and then I get taught the lesson very quickly, and you're just like, and there's no time for shame and guilt. It's just cool. That is done. If you want for me, I speak for myself, if you want a healthy, divine relationship, then you need to look at this mother aspect. You need to really go. So now I've identified it. I've fully identified it, which I didn't. Like I say, I've done a lot of, and there's just a lot of healing around the subconscious. There's so much memory that we don't have, there's so much memory that we don't have. So this is where healing work comes in, and working with practitioners and diving into meditation and relaxing the brainwave state, relaxing the body into parasympathetic. There's many ways we can do it. So we either move into meditation work where you can begin to grasp memories or look at what is appearing in your visual or feeling space with regards to why that fear is present, or we can move through bigger so that would be a nice exercise for identification. Now, if we speak to release work, somatic release of that memory within the body, we would move to deeper work with regards to, let's say, breath work first, and then even deeper work with regards to medicine work. And I just want to say, medicine work or psychedelic medicine work is not always your first go-to. There are many, many layers where we can begin to look at these things.
So we're going to definitely cover the somatic release exercises that Brigitte mentioned. We've got a whole episode planned for that, so we can really dive deep into that topic. So I wanted to just shift a little bit into the bigger aspects of fear globally, right? So first we touched on
Yes.
people very close to us, generally our parents, that have created some sort of fear or trauma, which now we're sort of reliving. But besides the people close to us, there's like this global envelope or blanket of fear around the world that's being broadcast, I guess, by certain people. I mean, it's very weird. Like, I stopped watching the news. I think COVID for me was a big wake up call, and since then I completely stopped watching the news. And I must be honest, since I stopped watching and following the news, life is actually pretty great. you know, it's
Mm,
only when
mm,
you read the news, it's like, oh, doom and gloom and everything's happening and this and that. But
mm.
when you detach from that constant wheel of fear, in your life, um, it's quite a relief. But most of the world is still covered in that because it's just part of their
Yes,
daily consumption, right, of information. You
yes,
mentioned like all this information that people are getting bombarded with, and a huge amount of what we consume, or what a lot of people consume, is a fear narrative. And
yes.
yeah, let's talk about that a bit. You know, what are your
Beautiful.
thoughts on that? What it's all about?
Well, again, I think I'm gonna let's say this. I think from a critical thinking perspective, and if you really go into your heart and your soul, I think we could all agree that, you know, there's something off with how we are living on the planet. In our last episode, I spoke about the cube, right? Us really not having time to prioritize the well-being of the self, right? And so we're going to go quite deep here from the perspective of what and how are we living at the moment? What is the system that has been created? And it's a very patriarchal system, created by a kind of toxic masculine out view of the world, a very materialistic view of the world, a very mind-driven reptilian view of the world and how things should be. And again, the mind is an amazing, miraculous tool, but we've kind of lost, and God is perceived as masculine. And what we're rectifying now, those of us in doing spiritual work on a greater scale, we would be called grid workers, that's really working with the grids of the earth. What we are doing is bringing or anchoring in the frequencies of the feminine, right? So we've lost this feminine cyclical nature. It's become so linear, so pressurized, so materialistically driven, etc., etc., etc. And so I started this to say that we can inherently look within ourselves and say, something doesn't feel right. This precious system, it's not sustainable, right? It's not sustainable. And so we spoke about, I think all of us are aware that there is some sort of perceived hierarchy on the planet, so we are just the mere minions, the people, and then we have the institutions, the corporate spaces, the technocrats, the governments, etc., etc., etc. And I said perceived hierarchy because at the end of the day, when we all go to bed at night or take a shit on the toilet, we're all the same. You know what I mean? So we have this perceived hierarchy, and essentially that perception is an illusion. And the illusion is there to create separation. And that separation creates disconnect from your soul your higher intelligence, your heart, all right? And the system is set up at this point in time so that you don't have time to sit in the heart, to clear out the other data points that are funneling through your sensory system at any point in time, right? Through your 5 senses. It's overwhelming, and this is why our nervous systems are in shutdown. So again, we have technological advancement, which is amazing. We have, we're in an amazing time on planet Earth, but it's too much, too fast, and that's okay for some, but it's as if we only have one system. And I think that's dangerous, because within that one system, we all have to be successful, this, then the next, and keep up with the Joneses. And it's almost impossible when you then have political, global, and spiritual agendas appearing in your reality field. Insert the example of COVID, vaccinations, the war, Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Palestine, a million things. So now you're trying to keep in your box system, just getting your stuff done, but you've got this information coming in. And because you are part of the one, because you still have a heartbeat there somewhere, you cannot help but be energetically connected to it, right? And so all of this information is going to affect you. It's going to bring you, so these are the trigger events we spoke of. It's going to bring you through and into spaces of reflection, contemplation, possibly pain and suffering and hurt, because within the one, so here we speak to quantum physics, within the one, all of this is just nets. It's all vibrations, and we have a net, and the net at the moment of fear, hopelessness, and suffering is so thick and strong. And so, like you say, a beautiful, empowered decision to not listen to the news is one way of taking accountability for your family unit. So you could say, for me and my family unit, this is what I need to do now, because I'm aware that the world keeps on turning, that I am infinite and will rebirth at any point in time, that this planet has been through cataclysmic events, that I'm not here for the first time, and this is all that I can do. So that's a nice conscious decision. But if we are not, there's many different aspects. It's the dichotomy, the polarity of this planet, the duality. If we're not looking at these things and actually transmuting them, if we're not staying in awareness, so we're bypassing the fear, is also not entirely helpful, because then you're remaining in a kind of love and light bubble as a coping mechanism to keep yourself protected. But again, another trigger event might happen that you cannot ignore. So I think what this speaks to really is balance, to find balance in your reality, to be able to cope, to know that you're not bypassing, and to be empowered with the information that you're taking, how you're processing it. Do you have a self-care routine? Are you joining a meditation class or releasing through breathwork, or going for a walk with the dogs? Are you making time to keep things in your reality balanced? Because the agendas are there very purposefully. Never doubt this. We have a industrial military complex ruling our planet, basically. Inflation is on the rise, war is increasing. That's industrial military complex. And of course, when we speak about war and inflation and all of these things and pedophilia rings and all of that, it's atrocious. It's embarrassing to identify as human at this point in time. And so they want that. They want you to just move into such a dark space. And this is what's interesting, is because this dark space is simultaneously the birthing chamber for your awakening. So, when we look at the universe and our reality field within a quantum perspective as the one, full energy, and so we have a ball that is vibrating, we have certain sections, like how much of that vibrating ball consists of a pie of fear? How much of it is love? And so sometimes in such complex times with so much data, it's really all we can do and say, I am a vibration, and on this day, in this week, in this month, I am going to vibrate the frequency of celebration. I'm going to vibrate the frequency of peace, right? I am going to do the work to clear this fear, because from what I see, from the wisdom within me, this game that these, our other human beings, our brothers and sisters are playing, is not something I wish to give my attention and energy to, because I want to take back my power and I don't wish to add to the fear frequency. But to get to those sentences and those statements is a lot of self-work, and coming back to the story earlier, when I look at the levels of trauma that we are dealing with, it blows my mind. It blows my mind because, and it's never ending. And I don't mean to say that as a, something to dishearten you, but it's such a magnificent time because we have come into this planet, most of us, with amnesia, right? And that amnesia is very specific to our incarnation at this time. We've been manipulated to have that amnesia so that we can be controlled by these negative agendas. And as we awaken, so as the agendas happen, we have a trigger timeline event. The trigger timeline event pushes us through our shadow. The shadow brings us through our darkness and our depth and our pain and our fear. And all we can do is recognize that we're still breathing. We're still here. We are not alone. And so we come out of it, and yet there's more and more and more. And it's this cycle, and we learn more. And so the one, it's like this chaos is breeding enlightenment simultaneously. And we can have deep philosophical discussions of that, but to really begin to honor the frequency which resonates through your body. And when you have issues in your life, go and look at trauma. We don't need to be flying dragons and connecting with interdimensional beings and finding out our galactic heritage. There is so much trauma, because once you've worked on individualized trauma, you will begin to work on more collective-based trauma. And so we spoke about that data that comes through. The data chunks are just more, and they're pertaining to more historical timelines, because you're collecting aspects of yourself through the trauma identification, through the trauma release, and so that you can come into your God body. And it's fucking hard work. It's not easy.
So
I know I
yeah, so I'm going to try and bring it back into a focused discussion.
Beautiful.
On
fear.
there's clearly an agenda to push a lot of fear onto the world, and like you said, it's almost like a distraction and putting us into that sort of vibe and frequency, but it can also, like you said, be the catalyst for our spiritual awakening. But
Yes.
the choice is always in the person, I guess, and that's maybe where
Yes.
the difference comes in. It's like, it's not a guarantee to be your spiritual awakening, but it is an opportunity, as you have to look at other ways of dealing with this continuous anxiety and continuously reliving the same scenario, right? Like attracting the same
Correct.
relationships, or having the same financial troubles, or having the same, I don't know, whatever kind of issues,
Yes.
but you keep reliving it because you haven't dealt with that trauma.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the choice is
Thank you.
yours. You
Thank
can
you for
continue.
mentioning. Yes.
Yeah, you can
So
continue, or
such a powerful statement.
mm,
The
and then you can
choice,
try.
the choice, that's a very powerful statement, because
Yes,
it would seem and the illusion would make it feel like you do not have choice, much like our COVID timeline. You do not have choice. You must take this thing. And this is where critical thinking comes in. And critical thinking, much like emotional intelligence, is nowhere when you are rattled in your nervous system, right? It is nowhere when you are in fear. We've all been in that place where we've had a big outburst with someone, emotional outburst, and we just want to start typing and calling. Whew, not the right time. We need to come into parasympathetic nervous system, come into rest, come into a self-empowered state before we make decisions. And this is where media plays a role, and excessive information. And of course, because we have such a big technological and informative space, there's so much, and you've got your cousin messaging you in that WhatsApp group, and it becomes too much. But yes, the statement that you made around choice is what is so powerful, and I'm so grateful that you mentioned that, because when I do the mushroom ceremonies, the one thing that I want people to get from it, without having my own agenda, but is that they are in recognition that they have choice. From that point, we can begin to institute a healing program, etc., etc. But many people, a huge portion of this, of our humanity, doesn't believe that they have choice. And in the times that we're about to enter into, we think things have been tough. We will more than likely call this timing the good old days. We are still going through absolute dissolution of false structures, right? And what I speak to here is of very much higher spiritual understanding. Everything is going to come down, right? And I don't say that as fear porn in any way, shape, and form. But you have choice. And sometimes that choice may bring you to a space, and I'm going deep here. Sometimes that choice may bring you to a space of, I'd rather die. And here is where our spiritual understanding and teachings really come in, because it's a knowledgeable and wise soul that knows that death is merely the gateway to another space within this time matrix, or another time matrix, and we're going to be pushed to these spaces. It's much like I mentioned in our other podcast, where we have to, and this is why it's such a spiritually activated time right now, because the choice points are not, oh, well, yeah, no, I'll have a free range egg versus an organic egg. It's your entire constitution, your values, your ethics, your morals as a Christed angelic human being, versus control, manipulation, bioweaponry, bullshit that you don't want. And this is why I said, in the system, it's like we've created one system, and it's like we are an entire planet of exquisitely talented souls with different ways of creating, and engineers and like bright minds and incredible hearts, and some of us, our consciousness can bring in information and technology from what we call the future. And if you want to live in that box system and be hooked up to the hive mind through AI, then great. But why do we just need one system? Why is it being controlled by just one faction? It's bullshit. It's 8 billion. I mean, think of a household with, husband, wife, 2 kids. Already there, it's like we've got to give and take, and not everyone in that household has got the same vision and purpose. And so this is what they're kind of doing, is allowing this fear to grip you so deeply that you believe that you don't have choice. And this is very important when it comes to spiritual teachings, is identification of belief systems, right? Because that's where all the healing begins, is and this is what happens in our trigger events. We will be re-evaluating belief systems. It's okay to change them or have a change within them, but they are what guide you and lead you to how you act in this reality. And if your belief system is, you know what, actually, what was it that Klaus Schwab said? You will own nothing and be happy. If your belief system is that, then that's a perfect model for you. No one's taking that away from you. But I, as an organic, living, hippie-based, free-loving, nomadic spirit who wants to connect to organic source consciousness, I'm not interested. Let me, live in a commune somewhere else and grow my own food and vegetables and do my own thing. I'm not interested in your agenda, because I have stepped into my sovereignty, So this fear is just debilitating. It's like this big fog over you, and it's a weapon. It's an absolute weapon.
But I think the people that use fear as a weapon, they have a deep understanding of the physiology of fear. So exactly what we spoke about, right, for the last hour.
Yes.
They understand that if you bombard the human body with fear, the critical part of the mind will shut down. The body will default back to the fight, flight, freeze brain. And it would be too distracted to go into critical thinking mode. And that's how you can manipulate and push information. So they have a really deep understanding of how the body processes fear, and then fear is actually used to manipulate and direct mass consciousness, right? And move people in a certain way. And the choice,
because also...
Yeah, you can jump in.
Yeah, the choice points are getting, finer and finer, as in narrower and narrower. Because, for example's sake, let's say again, let's say the timeline now is war and inflation. People are struggling financially, and not only are they struggling financially, we're still putting in the same amount of time and effort into our 9-to-5 jobs within the cube, and we're receiving the same, but it has less value in the outside and external reality. So, of course, that's going to move you into a place of depletion, hopelessness, and hopefully questioning, like, what the fuck, and essentially... You're going to move to a space where you feel like you are defeated. And that's what they want, because once you are defeated, what will they do? Critical thinkers, they're going to create a solution for you, right? And that solution will be, don't worry, you don't have to work anymore. You can live in a meta reality, and we'll have robots do everything for you. And while you are in that meta reality, they're cloning your consciousness. I'm going deep now, right? They're cloning your consciousness. You're just a vessel now. You have no ownership over your own consciousness. So consciousness is completely hijacked. The vessel is devoid of the spirit of what was your consciousness. And so we move into these crazy dystopian realities in future timelines where, you know, those controllers that are using these psychological fear operations are living, you know, in whatever reality they've created. So we have to understand. So as much as this topic was about fear and physiology of fear and how it relates to trauma, there's a deeper weight here, saying if we don't begin to understand and look at this, we have complete, or we are consenting to, right? Through not understanding our own choice points, we are consenting to those kind of dystopian timelines, because within the one, we are all creating it. And this is what I think tweaks people out a bit, because they're like, I didn't consent to vaccination programs. I didn't consent to the war. But when we are doing deep spiritual work within the law of one, we are taking mass accountability and mass responsibility for being creators of our reality, and understanding that every single one of us has to stand up, own our consciousness, and do the work. Because that's where they want you, is complete depletion, fear, and another version of this is, so that's the controlling aspect. So they can now do whatever they want with your bodysuit. The other part of this is, we spoke about, the red aspects of panic and rage. What does that create? The perfect soldier. We're having a deep issue with the masculines on this planet. Emasculization. They're angry because we've forgotten about that feminine. They're angry, they're lost, they're confused. They also they maybe have money issues. Okay, cool. Come and be a soldier in our army. And what do you have? The perfect soldier. Angry, unable to take care of his family, patriotic maybe. And now we've got a fighting machine. So we see how this all works. And it's important because, and the thing that I want to say here is, please know this isn't the first time that we've done this. We are repeating cycles. And this is what someone like me, who has access to more information, it can make me very hopeless, because I can feel and see that we've done this for billions of years. We've been in war, and obviously some of the viewers could say, but how can you say that? This is linking to the Anunnaki. This is linking to the genesis of our creation. But for now, I think we've covered quite a lot on, how fear is manipulated, used, and created, and how it affects the body, from simple to quite galactic as well. I hope it's helped.
So I wanted to bring this talk to a close and conclude it. And the last thing you mentioned, I think, is really important, and we can uncover it a little bit, is the 8 billion souls on this planet, or give or take that number. We've actually collectively created what we're experiencing on the planet. Like, you might say, no, I didn't consent to the vaccinations, or I don't consent to war, or I don't consent to this materialistic living or destruction of the Amazon rainforest. But the reality is that collectively, we're all here on the planet, and collectively we have done this. And unless the whole collective change, or enough of the collective changes, the situation on Earth doesn't change, and we can end up in some sort of dystopian timeline. So there's a lot of potential timelines that humanity can move into, but the key thing again is a choice. So in your life, it's your choice, to do the work, to let go of the trauma, to clear the energy. And then as a planet, collectively, we all have a choice. As the whole human race, what are we going to do? We need to do the work and heal. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very dystopian ending.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I, again, want to thank you for that aspect of bringing in the choice, because that is an absolute truth. It may not seem it. And again, this is where you would have to look at your belief systems, and this is what people like me do. It's not an easy job, Often you introduce me or speak a lot to the mushroom part of my work. I have a lot of experience in that, but in the now moment, it's not actually my big focus. And if it is, it's got to be the right person, because there is so much data that comes through in those experiences that people are unable to embody. And, or we can do that experience, but essentially, if you're working with a healer and you're in the beginning of your journey, I would really recommend, much like you do with a medical aid or a health insurance, put money aside every month to work with someone over a period of at least 6 months, because we can easily come back into feeling the ego saying, I did that healing, I'm healed now, or I'm enlightened now, or whatever. But there are so many consciousness traps on this planet, even for enlightened and spiritual people. I'm experiencing it at the moment, where I have a lot of resistance to a certain aspect of my life. And the reason I have the resistance is because I can see it is a consciousness trap, and, to not fall into that, and to just keep, like I said, a nice balanced flow of continuous healing. And of course, you've got applications out there, apps of, many different things. We've got books. Just keep empowering yourselves. Keep empowering yourselves. Wake up every day, Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that. So we're going to conclude, because the very next talk we're going to have is about what to do once you've made the choice. What are the different somatic release tools that are available? And we can really uncover that in a great amount of depth. But I think the key point from this talk is that the choice is yours. Take the power back into your being, and know
Yes.
that you're not in a world of no choice, even despite what
Yes.
anyone tells you. So don't be
Yes.
forced into any situation. Take the power back. And once you take that power back, we're going to tell you what different tools you can try. So that's going to be our next episode. I am very, very excited for that. That's going to be packed with so much practical, information and tools that people can use. Brigitte,
Yeah, I
thank you
actually
again for your
might,
time.
beautiful. I was going to say, for your next one, I might share, a link to a little bit of release work that I've done that you guys can download, and just like a free daily 20-minute breath work. It's not, so I'm happy to share that as well with the listeners
Yeah, I think we
for the
introduced
next
that in
one.
our
Yeah.
next talk, and we can touch on it a little bit and tell people how to use that tool, because that's another tool that you're going to make available to people that have
Correct.
sort of made the choice to empower
Yes.
themselves. Okay,
Beautiful.
Brigitte, thanks
Thank you
again,
so
and
much.
until next time.
Thank you. Beautiful.